Whether you're a complete beginner to animation or you just want to know how to use the animation tools in Krita, this video will show you how. I've included timestamps and links in the description for everything you need to get started. So Krita is free and open source, and you can download it from their website. But if you buy it from Steam or the Google Play Store if you're on Android, it will auto update, which supports the team that improves it, and this is the version I have. Krita works on Windows, Mac, Linux and Android tablets. You can check the minimum and best requirements for Krita against what PC, laptop or tablet you're using to make sure it will run smoothly. Let's start with the simple animation exercise you can follow along with. You can download my finished Krita animation files in the description. Once you have downloaded Krita, you want to go to New Image, and here you'll have Custom Document. Typically, YouTube videos will be 1920 by 1080, and you just want to reverse that if you want a vertical instead. You can click Create, and this is the way I like to start my animation projects. You see animation templates here. You can choose either of these and select Use this template, and it will come up with a lot of different layers and things that may confuse you at first. And as you go through, you'll notice that they're only appearing one after the other. So if you want all of these layers to appear in the timeline when you're working, you can left click and pin to timeline, and then that way when you go in you can just click across and pin them if you want to see them side by side. If you want them to go away, you can just unpin them like that. So I like Custom Document, and then I'll just press Create. Now it will give you a background and a single paint layer. So this background, if you turn it off, it will then make it transparent. So if you want to do a character animation without any background, you just want to make sure that this is turned off before you export. But for now, we'll leave it on. So this is our first layer, and I'm just going to call it Roughs, like that, and it will rename itself in the timeline. Now any layer that we make in the layers panel will be mirrored in the timeline. So later on we'll have a layer for our line work and a layer for our colours, but we don't need those just yet. So I'm going to be on my roughs layer. Now you might be looking at all these different panels and being like, oh, I don't have those. So if you're just starting up Krita, you can go to Window, Workspace, Animation. But I like to have my brushes and other toolbars and options from the default space in Krita. So instead, I like to go to Settings, Dockers, and then I'll choose Animation Timeline and Onion Skin. Now there's also a little thing down here called Storyboard, and I will go over that later in the video. So for now, you can add it and move it somewhere and it will look like this, but typically I'll leave it as layers, and Storyboard will be for another project. So let's make our first drawing, and if I just start making lines on the canvas and then move across and make more lines, nothing has happened. The timeline has not changed, and if I scrub through, you'll see that they last for the entire thing, which is not good. So undoing those with Control Z, I want to go to my first frame, and there's a couple of ways you can do this. First, you can add blank frame, like that, and you'll notice it looks different. This outline shows an empty frame, and if I draw something in this, it becomes a solid block of color, and it shows that that has been drawn on. This little line between them shows the frame is holding. So this one is holding all the way across the timeline until we meet a new frame like that. And then once I've drawn on it, it will hold again. And if you want the same layout as me, what you can do is click and drag timelines and bars and everything around the screen, and it will slide for you. So sometimes they'll be blue like that, and then you can tab. Onion Skin is now here, but I don't like this layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this, which will make it go into its own window. So on the animation timeline down here, Onion Skin at the end, just so it's nice and neat. And you can turn it on and off with this onion icon just here. So in the timeline, you've got all these stop, play, skip, forward. If you want to know what each individual button is, you can just hover over them and it will come up with a little name. So next, as I move across the timeline, you'll notice this number is changing, and that will just tell me what number frame we are in the timeline. This is the drop frames button. Sometimes it's helpful to have on if your PC or laptop is stuttering or lagging, to see which is best for you if you turn it on or off. I leave the speed at 100%, and then we have add blank frame, add duplicate frame, and remove keyframes without moving anything around. Then we have our onion skin, audio, so you can import an audio clip to animate to lip sync, which I'll show you later. You can also remove the audio, turn the volume down and mute it. If you're doing lip sync animation and you're playing it through a lot, muting is very helpful because sometimes you get a bit sick of listening to the track over and over again. Now in this panel you have your clip start and frame rate, and then this is very helpful. So this is your auto key blank. Yours might be on duplicate, so I like to have this activated on auto key blank, so if I move across the timeline and start drawing, it will activate new keyframes without me having to click this or set up a shortcut. Now your clip start will be 0 and the clip end is on 100. I can make this lower if I want in this menu, or I can right click here and choose set end time. Right clicking on the timeline will also give you your start time, end time. You can paste keyframes, you can insert keyframes and hold frames, remove frame and pull, and then create a blank frame, duplicate frame, and also change the color of your frame. This icon here is just to separate out your panels and toolbars so that they become their own thing rather than docked to a certain area on the screen. And this little X, you can get rid of the panel and like remove it completely. Now in your onion skin, which I will demonstrate later, you have -1, 0, and 1. To activate more, you can just click on the numbers at the top, and then you can lower the opacity of the drawings like this. Typically, I like to have -1, 0, and 1 activated, and the rest I leave alone, unless I need to reference a earlier frame or a later frame to make things more consistent in the design. You can then change your previous and your next frame color. So previous, I like to have it as red, and that's quite bright, so let's turn that down. And then green or blue, which I like to animate in, just turn that down like that and press OK. But that's totally up to you, whatever you want to do with that. So our first frame, we have created a blank frame. I'm going to choose a brush and then turn the size down. We'll do something very easy. If you want to change your color, you can go up here and click that and then just change it anywhere around the wheel. Because my starting colors are red and blue, I'm going to use purple. I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, like that. Now my hands are a little bit shaky, so if I want to smooth out that lines, I can use my brush smoothing, which is in the tool options. And if you go to settings, dockers, it should be here. And you can just activate that by ticking it and it should come up. And then you want stabilizer. Now that is quite slow, so I'm going to turn it down a little. There we go. I think that is much more to my liking. Right, so then we have our circle, and I'm just going to draw a face in this. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to move across to frame 6 and I want to copy this over here. Now, you'd think that you could just do Control C and Control V. That's not the way that you want to do it. You want to right click on here, copy, right click, paste, and then you'll see that we have the same on both frames. You can then go up to the toolbar here, depends on where you have it on the screen. Hover over and see what they are in here like this. So I'm going to use the transform and I'm going to move it over here and press enter to save that selection. So now we have 0 and 1. So back to 0, you'll notice that I have -1 and 1 activated in the timeline, but nothing is showing up for the onion skin, and that's because I don't have the lightbox tool activated. So it's this little light bulb, you just want to turn it on and then it will show us which frames are what. So how do I want to animate my character going from this one to this one? I'm going to go in the frame between and I'm going to create a new frame and I'm going to use a smear, which is one of my favorite animation techniques to use. I'm going to go back to the brush tool, and there's a couple of ways to do a smear, but I really like to stretch them out. So fun. Just get your character and just imagine you're getting this side of them and pulling them along. So everything is gonna be like really stretched out. So that's the ear and this is the mouth. And just stretch this leg out all the way like that. And then the hair around here like that. So if we turn the light table off, they do look really strange, but if you move them and flip between them quite fast, it looks all right, doesn't it? Now we want to just smooth it out a little bit. I want to add a little bit of anticipation for the move. So we have this pose, and then I want them to like lean back a little bit. So I am going to redraw them. And then I want this leg to come out as though they're like stepping. I'm not being too careful with this, and I'm not trying to stay on model because this is just very, very rough. Now here I'm going to make a new frame, and this character is going to be leaning back a little. Turn that off. So we have regular, anticipation, stretch, and then the bounce back into the original position. So what I want to do is I'm going to move these frames along. So I can either click and drag to select them and then move them. I can click individual frames and move them wherever I like. I can then hold the control key and select other frames and then move them. Or I can right click, hold frames, insert multiple hold frames, and I can choose 2 and it will add them in there for me. So I right click, hold frames like that, it will also insert them there for me. Now let's play that through, and I'm just going to right click, set end time, so we don't have to play through all these other frames as well. So go back to the beginning, press play. And that's really not too bad, but to really register the movement a little more, I want to insert some hold frames here. And we're gonna go for 6. And then this is the last frame, so we're gonna set out the end time there. So when we go back to the beginning, when we press play, it has a little bit more time for the eye to register that the sequence has stopped like that. Now you can stop there if you like. But the way I could push this further and make it a true loop is by having this character at the side smear back this way. And we're going to try a different smear technique. Now to save time, I could redraw the anticipation, but I'm just going to copy this frame, go 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to right click and paste the keyframe. And then I'm going to turn the onion skin on, and I'm going to use this transform to move it. I can right click on this and choose mirror horizontal, so it's moving this way. I'm just going to rotate it slightly so the hair doesn't go off the edge of the canvas. Match it up with this foot, press enter. If I turn these off, I'm going to move this across and then set the end time out. Just going to move that there. So we have move across, and then we're going to have another smear. So starting here. Now I've just activated -6 on the onion skin so I can see our first frame and where we want to get back to. If I had too many frames on here and I still wanted to see our return point, what I could do is select this, copy, and then move it over here and then paste it, and then I could still have -1, 0, and 1 to reference from in this new frame. So I'm going to go back to my brush, and the way I'm going to do this is multiples. We're going to add in extra pieces. And there's no real set rules to this. It's very much a what looks good to you version. I love using smears because they are just really fun, and you can exaggerate and do whatever you like with them really, without worrying too much about consistency or what they're going to look like. So with this one, I am going to do the same thing. I'm going to right click and just copy this keyframe and then paste this keyframe over here, and then I'm going to use this to mirror horizontal and then turn it back. Here I'm going to set end time, and then if we play it through, now you can really have fun with this. You can change the expression on one side to another. So if we have a smiley face here, we could then go back to the eraser, and I'm just going to change the expression. And then like this. Going to add some eyebrows and alter the expression as they go across, and then smiley face. So smile, smile, and then we have angry, angry. So playing this through, I'm just making sure that we have all of our eyebrows in here. Yes, we do. Okay, so you can do your basic rough animation all in one layer, but if you have more complicated designs that you want to switch out, you can also put each different element on a different layer. So you'd have roughs dash head, roughs dash hair, and then roughs body. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm now going to make a new layer, and I'm going to call this line work. And basically, I'm going to turn this one down, and in my line work layer, I'm going to create frames that mirror what is in my rough animation. You don't have to do this completely. If you end up making a loop like this, you can do a couple and then copy them over to the end like we did in the roughs. But I'm going to redraw all of these. So for the line work, you can choose whatever brush you like, and this is where you want to make it neat, make it consistent, make use of the onion skin. And if you really want to make it consistent, you can import a reference of your character into Krita. You can just find it in your files and drag and drop it like this. Insert as a new layer, insert new file layer, open a new document, insert as a reference image. So then it will be in your file like this, and it doesn't come up in a layer. So I'm just gonna make this smaller. Yeah, you can move this around as you work. So with my line work, I've got my pencil selected, and then what I want to do is I'm gonna zoom in like this, and I'm just gonna neaten this up. And you want to sort of use your rough layers as a guide, but the line work is where you're going to neaten them up. You can also do a step in between this, and that's called the cleanup. So basically, instead of line work, you would do another layer, and this would be where you make your design consistent and you follow your original design if you have one. This is just for a test, so feel free to use my character as an example if you don't have one already. I'm just going to up my brush stabilizer. If you're doing a lined style character like this, you do want to make sure that all of your lines and things are completely closed and there's no gaps, because it's going to make it easier to color later. If you're finding that your character is looking a little off, you can always lower the opacity really low again, just so the rough line work is barely there. So if you started to line and clean up and everything, and you realize that you can't move your reference image, you just need to go to the reference images tool, click that, and it should bring up the selection box so you can move it in, around, or outside of the canvas, or you can delete it. Okay, let's get on with the rest of this lining. Now what I can do is I can copy this frame and move it there, and then I can also use the freehand selection tool and choose X, and then I'm going to clear the keyframe, and then I'm going to paste. Now it has moved it to a new frame, and what I can do is just drag it down onto there, and then I can delete this, adjust it, and this way the head is now consistent. If I then zoom out, doesn't need one. This does, so I can copy this keyframe across here, paste, paste. The head does need to be tilted a little more. I'm going to use this. I'm going to zoom in, tap it to bring up the selection, and it's going to need to be rotated a little bit more like that. Press enter. Maybe a little bit more. Right click, mirror horizontal. And I will be editing the mouths on these and the expressions. But if the head is still in like the right place, doesn't matter too much. Now let's draw the rest of the body. I am not using my mouse to drag along because I have set up some shortcuts. Now the way to do that, you want to go to settings, configure Krita, and then in keyboard shortcuts under animation, unfold this and take a look at what I have added for my own shortcuts. So we have S for create blank frame, Q and E are insert keyframe left and right, D is next keyframe, A is previous keyframe, and W is remove keyframe. Once you set all those up, obviously there's a lot more that I haven't added. So to make a shortcut, you can tap one of them and then under custom, type in a letter. If it is already assigned to something else, this will come up. Now you can either reassign that or cancel it and find a new key or shortcut to add to that. When you're done, you want to press OK and you will be able to skip between keyframes like this. In more complex animations, people will do the eyes and the eyebrows separately. It really just depends on what you need to move around. Rather than redrawing everything every time, you can separate out different elements without going to too much trouble. So this is our final lined animation. The next thing we want to do is color this. Now, Krita is a bit of a pain when it comes to coloring. So you could do it manually. You could make another layer like this, bring it underneath your line work, create your blank frames, and then use the selection tool and select it in the line work layer, making sure that you're on here. Then go back to your paint layer and use the bucket tool to then fill in the color. That is not the way I do it. Some people color it in by hand using the paintbrush and they outline everything underneath and then they fill it in with the bucket tool. I think that takes too long if you're doing a lined animation. Personally, what I would do is I would duplicate the layer. So the copy, I'd call it color, and then I would use the bucket tool to change my colors and fill them in like that. You do want to make sure that when you're colouring, your bucket tool is reaching the end. So there's like a slight white outline around this, which is not good. So you could go in manually, just neaten that up like that. But in a long animation, that's going to take way too much time. So the easy way to get rid of this white outline is to undo the colour. And then in the bucket tool, you want to scroll down under the tool options and grow it by a couple of pixels, and then if it's not enough, you can always expand and experiment and see how that works. So from this point, it is very much a click and fill across the animation. There isn't really a better way to do this in Krita. I have tried several other ways, like using a colorize mask, but that did not work within the animation section. So if I add a colorize mask and then I create new layers, it doesn't work like that. I can add in the color. It really just doesn't like it. I find it best to just color the individual frames on a duplicated line work layer. I like to go through one color at a time, just so you know that you've got all of the areas filled. And then if I want to change color, I can eyedropper tool this. I'm going to change the pupils to be the same color as the line work. And then we want white for the eyes and then the mouth. If you can't see it and you need the background to be a different color, you can just fill the background with a different color temporarily. And then that will let you see where you haven't colored. If I zoom out, we can see the full animation. Now to export your animation, if you want it transparent and you just want the actual animation, you want to hide your background so it is showing the checkerboard, and then you want to go to File, Render Animation, and you want to make sure that your first frame and last frame are where you want to export from. If you export as an image sequence, you can choose where you want to save it. PNG will give you transparency, so leave that alone. Your base name is fine as frame, and then start numbering at 0. You can do only unique frames, so that will be only your keyframes will be exported as individual images. But if you leave this unticked, then it will export 0 to 44. All of these frames will be their own individual image. So it's really important that you make a new folder and save all of those images in there, because it will be quite a lot. Especially if you've got a big animation, it's going to be chaos. If you just want a video, make sure you untick that because it will export both. To export as a video, we've got our 1920 1080, which is the size of our canvas. And then our frames per second is 24, which is fine. So I tend to go for these 3 options, but MP4 or GIF is fine. Save it where you want to, so click that. If you have audio, this box should be ticked. Now you can press OK. If it doesn't work, you will need FFmpeg, and I have this file that I use listed in the description. So you can download that, move the file to your desktop or somewhere that won't be deleted, and then leave it alone. Don't touch it ever again. Then you want to find it through this folder icon to where you've saved it, and then press OK. So I'm choosing MP4. I'm saving it to my desktop, save, and then OK. Might render out like that, and then we have the result is like this. Now because I hid the background, the pink is not in there. I'm just going to change the color so it's not quite as blinding, like this. File, render animation, okay. Now that is very, very short animation. So if I wanted to make this animation longer, I'm a very big fan of saving different versions. So as you can see, this says not saved. I would not recommend that. So to save your animation, file, save as, and then I'm just going to save it on my desktop. And then I'm going to file, save as kdtest 5. So we have the original layers separate, and then we have test 5. I'm going to right click on this and then merge with layer below. And then we have an animation on one layer. This will also make the file a little bit smaller. And then I can also delete my roughs. So now if I want to make this longer, I can click the first frame, hold shift on my keyboard, click the last frame, and then I want to copy keyframes. I'll then leave a gap of 3 frames, right click, paste, and go all the way to the end. 1, 2, 3, and then I'm gonna right click, set end time. And then if I go to 0, you'll see it plays through a couple of times, and then I can go to File, Render Animation, and export as my video.